Around the beginning of the 990s, Basil II began showcasing his formidable combat skills that would soon become legendary. A strict disciplinarian, the emperor's relentless inspections of his troops transformed them into a finely tuned military machine. This proved crucial during the prolonged war in Bulgaria, where Byzantine forces seized key fortresses deep within enemy territory. But by late 994, Basil had to make a tough decision: entrust the Duke of Thessaloniki with command of the Western Army and return to Constantinople. Why? The eastern frontier was in chaos and demanded his immediate attention. A Fatimid army, led by Governor Manjutakin, had weakened Byzantine forces in the region, forcing Duke Michael Bortzes to retreat to Antioch. By the fall of 994, the Fatimid ruler of Syria had laid siege to the strategically vital city of Aleppo. The blockade caused severe food shortages, and the city was on the verge of surrender. Can you imagine the stakes? If Aleppo fell, the southeastern frontier would be exposed, jeopardizing 3 centuries of Byzantine progress in the area. Recognizing the urgency, Basil spent the winter assembling and training his troops, and as soon as the snow cleared, the army marched to relieve Aleppo. Each soldier rode a horse or mule with an extra mount at their disposal. This meticulously planned Restless March would become one of Basil's most remarkable military achievements. A journey from Constantinople to Syria that typically took 2 months, completed in just 16 days. Basil's strategy of surprising Manjutakin with speed paid off, big time. The Byzantine forces outmaneuvered the Fatimid general, swiftly burned his camp, lifted the siege, and forced him to retreat to his base in Damascus. Aleppo was saved, without a single sword being swung. Basil continued his campaign in 995 by reclaiming Fatimid gains in Syria and laying siege to Tripoli, a major port city in the Levant. But back in the west, trouble was brewing. The newly appointed Duke of Thessaloniki, Gregory Taranites, proved utterly incapable of halting the advance of Emperor Samuel of Bulgaria. Gregory was soon trapped behind the walls of the provincial capital. He tasked his son, Ashot, with curbing Bulgarian raids around Thessaloniki. Unfortunately, Ashot was quickly defeated and captured by Samuel. This forced Gregory to sally forth with most of the city's garrison to confront Samuel. After a brief skirmish, the Byzantines pursued the retreating Bulgarians, only to fall into a well-laid ambush. Gregory and most of his men were cut down. News of the disaster in Macedonia reached Basil in Syria. Despite his efforts to encircle Tripoli, Basil's inability to blockade Fatimid naval supply lines forced him to lift the siege and march his army back to Constantinople. But even with the setbacks in the west, Basil chose a slow and deliberate return journey. Why? Because he hadn't properly visited Anatolia since childhood, and this was his chance to assert his presence. At a vast estate in Caesarea, he was greeted by Constantine Melenos, who hosted a lavish feast for the entire imperial army. Along the route to the capital, Basil continued to make unannounced visits to the estates of powerful Anatolian aristocrats. These visits weren't just social calls, they were strategic. His reforms aimed at supporting small landowners had diminished the influence of the aristocracy, displeasing many powerful men. So these friendly visits with the imperial army in tow, they helped reaffirm wavering loyalties to the emperor. Once back in Constantinople, urgent state matters demanded Basil's attention. Meanwhile, Samuel delivered another blow to the Byzantines, cutting short the career of Gregory's successor, John Qualdos, after defeating and capturing him in yet another ambush. By this time, Samuel had made ambushing Byzantine generals his specialty. Emboldened during the 996 campaigning season, he ventured deep into Byzantine territory, wreaking havoc as far as the Peloponnese. When word of Samuel's movements reached Constantinople, Basil saw an opportunity to cripple the Bulgarian leader in a single decisive strike. He appointed the relatively unknown Nikephoros Ouranos as his new general in the west, tasking him with harassing and intercepting the Bulgarian army on their return journey. As Samuel's forces approached the Bulgarian frontier, they forded the swollen Spercheios River after days of heavy rain. Confident that Ouranos could not cross, Samuel neglected to post a proper watch. Big mistake. Unbeknownst to the Bulgarians, Ouranos discovered a ford and led his troops across the river at dusk on July 16th. In a masterfully executed night attack, the Byzantines achieved total surprise. The unprepared Bulgarians were crushed near their encampment. According to some accounts, Samuel and his son, Gavril Radomir, evaded capture by pretending to be dead among the fallen soldiers. They eventually escaped and returned to their stronghold in Ohrid. With most of his army dead or captured, Samuel offered peace to Basil. Despite his decisive victory, Basil accepted the terms, aware that rising tensions in the east prevented him from capitalizing on his success against Bulgaria. Basil's earlier campaign in Syria had provoked Fatimid Caliph al-Aziz to personally lead an invasion. He assembled a massive fleet to support the effort, but a fire in the harbor destroyed nearly all his ships. Undeterred, al-Aziz ordered the construction of another fleet, but fate intervened once more as the Caliph died in 996 before the invasion could begin. His death plunged the Fatimid Caliphate into civil war, as Turkish and Berber factions vied for control. Seizing the opportunity, Basil replaced the ineffective Michael Bortzes with the more aggressive Damian Dalasenos as Duke of Antioch. Over the next year and a half, Dalasenos succeeded in capturing several Fatimid fortifications. However, his attempts to take Tripoli faced the same challenges that had thwarted Basil, as supplies continued to reach the city by sea. In early 997, Basil expanded operations in Syria, supporting an anti-Fatimid revolt in the ancient Phoenician city of Tyre. Meanwhile, a major fire broke out in the strategically important city of Apamea, destroying much of its provisions. Dalasenos quickly moved to besiege the city, anticipating its surrender due to the lack of supplies. However, forces from the Emirate of Aleppo arrived first, claiming the city for their emir. When Dalasenos reached Apamea, the Aleppian forces were already encamped outside the walls. The Byzantines forced the Aleppines to lift the siege, but the smaller Muslim host deliberately left their supplies behind, which were promptly seized by the Apamean garrison. With a force of around 10,000 men, Dalasenos proceeded to besiege the city, aiming to starve it into submission. Meanwhile, the newly appointed Fatimid governor of Damascus, Jaish ibn Samsama, crushed the Byzantine-backed revolt in Tyre, and then marched to Apamea with an 11,000-strong relief force. The Fatimid and Byzantine armies faced each other on opposite banks of the Orontes River near Apamea. Samsama's army was divided into three main lines: Bedouin cavalry on the left wing, a large center of Iranian infantry bolstered by 500 slave soldiers, and a right wing of Berber and Bedouin horsemen under Samsama's command. The Byzantine formation is less clear, but their center was the first to ford the river and attack the Fatimid center. The well-drilled Byzantine troops initially gained the upper hand, causing the Fatimid infantry to break and flee. However, the lack of discipline among the Byzantine soldiers became apparent, as many broke formation to pursue the fleeing enemy. Seeing the center collapse, the Fatimid wings also retreated, leaving only the 500-strong Ghilman cavalry to resist the Byzantines for hours. During the chaos, a Kurdish officer from Bukhara spotted Dalasenos and, seeing an opportunity to turn the tide, rode toward the Byzantine general with his sons and bodyguards. Overconfident and believing the Kurds were surrendering, Dalasenos approached them, only to be killed by a spear thrown by one of the riders. The death of Dalasenos demoralized the Byzantine troops, and the Fatimids, emboldened by the news, counterattacked. The clash turned into a massacre, with 6,000 Byzantine soldiers killed by the end of the day, a staggering loss by medieval standards. Fortunately for the Byzantines, Samsama did not fully exploit his victory, as he had to return to Damascus to address internal issues. To the west, the war between the Bulgarians and Byzantines resumed in 997, forcing Basil to once again fight on two fronts. Yet, it was these very challenges that would ultimately forge Basil II into the greatest emperor of the Macedonian dynasty. But more on that in the next episode. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you'd like to support our work, consider joining our Patreon for ad-free early access to videos, or simply subscribe to our channel, USA Vibes, and leave a comment to help us grow. As always, we'll see you in the next one.